Hey, Mark, welcome to LSAT Unplugged.
Thanks very much, Steve. Great to be here.
Hey, thanks for joining me. So I saw you're up to a lot in the legal field with Legal Mosaic, and you're an attorney, correct? Can you tell us a bit more about your background?
Sure. So for the first 25 years of my career, I was a practicing attorney. I was a civil trial attorney and handled bet the company cases. I was first I was an assistant United States attorney, and then I became a partner in a big law firm. While I was a partner, a federal judge appointed me the receiver of an international aviation business that conducted operations on 4 continents, and I ran that business for 4 years. So I learned a lot about business. I learned a lot about all the inefficiencies of legal services from the buyer's perspective. Then I started my own boutique law firm that was very, very tech-centric. I had 3 offices in 3 different cities, and in 1991, I went to one of my then biggest clients, AT&T, and I said, how can I metaphysically be in all 3 offices at one time? And by the way, how can I avoid having 3 different law libraries? And how can we better communicate with both internally and with our clients? So over what was then called a T1 line, we had a virtual law library. This is in 1991. We had video conferencing that linked our 3 offices and linked us with some of our largest clients. And we also had a centralized attendant, meaning that you could call any of the 3 offices, 3 different parts of the country, and get the same chirpy voice. So I kind of learned way back when how technology thoughtfully applied and deployed can really level the playing field in terms of legal service delivery. In the last 15 years of my career, Steve, I've been more focused on the industry and more specifically the business aspects of delivering legal services. So taking more of the client's perspective and how might legal delivery be more thoughtfully reconfigured so that it provides better, faster, cheaper service, which is what clients want today. So that in a nutshell is my career, with lots of additional things. If anyone is interested, they can check out my website, legalmosaic.com, for a much fuller explanation.
Excellent. Well, it sounds like you're kind of at the forefront of these changes that are happening in the legal industry. I've often heard it said that it's not really outsourcing that's impacting things quite so much as it is technological advances that are changing the field. And I'm gathering that you've helped law firms make these changes in the past as well as at your own firm, correct?
Well, let me put it to you this way. I think that technology has certainly changed the playing field, but technology is like evidence, Steve. Not all of it is of similar relevance. It really depends on, what the problem is that technology is helping to solve, as opposed to technology of and by itself being a game changer. And so it's people who are ultimately changing legal delivery, but it's technology that is enabling them to do it in a way that is far faster, more efficient, and scalable than people alone. And in terms of your comment about firms, it used to be until quite recently that law firms were the only game in town. But in the last 10 years especially, a lot of what used to be called legal work that was performed exclusively by law firms has now migrated to in-house legal departments, as well as to other types of legal service providers who are not necessarily engaged in the practice of law, but who are delivering ever larger swaths of work that used to be considered legal.
Interesting. So what does this mean for law students, those who are looking to go to law school? How do they need to adapt to this changing world where tech is having more of an impact as companies are looking to bring down the cost and, of course, deliver things more quickly?
Well, that's a great question, and I would say that it is both a challenge as well as an opportunity. It's a challenge to young lawyers or prospective lawyers to the extent that in my day, everyone was preparing for what was essentially a practice-centric career. And for most law grads, that would mean that they would either go to a law firm, perhaps they would do a stint in the government, whether it's the federal government or maybe some state a governmental entity like the state attorney's office, the public defender's office, things like that. Not many of them would be going in-house. And certainly very few lawyers had careers in legal technology. There was virtually no legal technology, much less in other types of cottage industries that have sprung up. So the challenge, one more time with feeling, the challenge for people embarking on a legal career today is that there are going to be fewer practice jobs because, as I suggested, many of them are going to be automated. Many of them are going to be done by paraprofessionals and indeed by other types of professionals. That's the challenge. The opportunity is that young lawyers who go through law school and can leverage their legal training with other skill sets. For example, project management, an understanding of how technology is being applied to the delivery of legal services, data analytics, understanding business. These are all augmented skill sets that I think increasingly are both necessary and provide new career avenues for young lawyers that frankly did not even exist, many of them as recently as a decade ago.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So it sounds like the law alone may not be enough to put yourself at the top of the application pile when it comes to making yourself useful to a firm or perhaps going out solo.
That's exactly right. Unless you happen to be the editor-in-chief of the Yale or Harvard Law Reviews, or are angling for a position in as a Supreme Court clerk. But of course, that's like telling somebody who plays recreational basketball, that they're necessarily going to be preparing for a career in the NBA. The numbers are slightly better in law, but if you look at the data in terms of the percentage of people who are going to large law firms, that number has decreased significantly during the last several years. And just by way of speaking personally for a moment, I teach at a number of law schools. I've taught at Georgetown, I've taught at Northwestern, two of the better law schools in this country, and I also have taught internationally at several law schools. And what I'm seeing is, whether it's here in the States or indeed globally, the number of people who are entering law firms, particularly larger firms, is decreasing. However, the good news is that for those students who have what I like to call augmented skills, not just sort of knowing the law, there are many, many more opportunities than there once were.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So let's say we're talking to pre-law students, those just entering law school now. They've got their hands full just studying for the LSAT and applying to law school, hoping to get into the best school possible or get the most scholarship money possible. And as you said, if you're Yale or Harvard, you're maybe the top 5, top 14, you don't need to have this augmented skill set to quite the same degree.
Correct.
But for the vast majority of applicants out there, what can they do specifically? Let's say they're straight out of college, or maybe they've worked a few years as a paralegal. Where are they going to find the time or find the opportunity to gain these extra skills?
Great question again. And the answer is that given the investment of time, given the investment of money that they're going to be making in going to law school, I would say that they better find the time to achieve these skills. So the first thing that I would recommend to those in the audience would be do a little bit of reading in terms of what's going on in the industry. Because if you know someone who is of my generation or the generation behind me who may have been a lawyer, chances are that that person knows very little or shockingly little about what's really going on in the industry. And they might tell you that, everything is going to be pretty much the same for you as it was for them, which couldn't be farther from the case. So I think it's really incumbent upon, anyone who has even a passing interest in the law or going to law school, she or he should devote some time to look at, what's going on in the industry. So if you want a couple of people whom I would suggest you look to read, I would say that at a very high level in terms of what's going on in professional services, my friend Richard Susskind in the UK, who has written several very thoughtful books, including The End of Lawyers, ? Among others. That would be a good place to look. People tell me that, my articles, I write a weekly column for Forbes on the global legal industry. People tell me that, that tends to be, fairly informative. There's a fellow called Bill Henderson, who is an academic outlier who actually has his hand on the pulse of the industry, probably more than most academics that I know of in the States, certainly, would be another person to look at. And finally, there's a good Canadian writer called Jordan Furlong, Furlong, who writes under Law 21. Those are a few people who you might look at, and through them, I'm sure you could find others. But I would urge people to, sort of find out what's going on in the industry first, because regrettably, law schools, particularly in the U.S., I find are not doing a terribly good job of aligning themselves with the marketplace. There are a few exceptions, but most of them, frankly, are operating very much as they did 25 to 30, 40 years ago. That's not a good thing.
No, it's definitely not a good thing. And I'm glad that you're giving folks some specific recommendations for places to find out more. And I'll definitely make sure to link to them, including your Forbes column. I'm wondering, are there any particular industry publications, either old school written paper format or online, that folks could check out just to kind of get the daily updates or the weekly updates?
Well, if you sort of want to follow what's going on in the industry, if you don't want to buy a subscription, Law 360 does a reasonably good job. There is a publication in the UK called Legal Futures, which I think is really, really good. There's another UK-based publication called The Lawyer. And I wanted to just mention, Steve, that, a lot of the change that's going on in the industry, law is really morphing from a very provincial by design kind of profession, where lawyers staked out their own turf, literally and figuratively. That's why, in the United States, you've got all these different state bars, and, yes, you can be admitted on an ad hoc basis from time to time, but lawyers have historically been very territorial. But what's happening is, as technology and this process are enabling new kinds of legal paradigms, new sorts of delivery models, law is really becoming now much more of an emerging global community. So I would also urge anyone interested in a legal career to look at what's going on in other jurisdictions. The UK is one interesting jurisdiction. Singapore, where I've spent a great deal of time working with the Singapore Academy of Law and the Singapore government in terms of helping Singapore to be, sort of in the vanguard of legal innovation and positive change. Singapore would be another place I would keep an eye on. Australia is a very interesting legal market, as is Germany. Again, I think that the similarities between and among these different jurisdictions are frankly much more compelling than the differences are. So that would be another piece of advice that I would offer to your listeners.
Well, it's very interesting. Yeah, you kept referencing the UK a few times, and it got me thinking, yeah, globalization is occurring, and obviously the United States with its federal system is quite complicated. That's why you have things like the multi-state bar now, right? Just to kind of break it down a little bit. But right. I can imagine yeah, go ahead, please.
Well, no, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off. One of the reasons why I have mentioned the UK a couple of times is because the UK has some uninformed lawyers here in this country would say that the UK has deregulated the legal profession. I don't think that's true at all. What they have done is they have re-regulated the legal profession and liberalized the rules in terms of who can own interests in law firms, who can invest in law firms, etc. And the reason why they did this was for the benefit of consumers of legal services, both individuals as well as large corporations. And if anyone is really interested in learning about legal regulation in the UK, which I think is really setting the standard for the world, she or he should look at something called the Clementi Report, Clementi. David Clementi, who is the former #2 at the World Bank, I believe, or I think it was the World Bank, was commissioned by Parliament to conduct a 2-year no-holds-barred investigation into the legal industry in Britain. And he concluded in a fairly scathing report that legal delivery was broken and that re-regulation had to be undertaken to better serve the public and society at large. So that's why I mentioned the UK a lot.
No, that's very interesting, because I think that as the world becomes more global, these regulations that are provincial in nature could end up being more of an obstacle to business than might have been originally intended or originally foreseen.
Let's put it this way. Lawyers in this country have very purposefully clung to these antiquated regulations, frankly, to protect themselves. But ultimately, I think what they're doing is they're shooting themselves in the foot because there are ways to circumnavigate the regulations. When I founded a company called ClearSpire, we did just that. And if anyone is interested in a really, I think a thumbnail analysis of what's happened in the last 10 years, take a look at it, and it's free. It's on my website. Take a look at the ClearSpire story, and I think it will give you a very interesting glimpse into what it means to be an entrepreneur in the legal sector, how entrepreneurship has been regarded by the legal marketplace, some of the obstacles to innovation, and some of the things that I've learned, as well as a pretty good comparison of what the marketplace was like a decade ago when I founded ClearSpire and what it's like today.
Well, that sounds very interesting, and I think it would be useful for folks looking to go to law school because, as you said, law schools aren't doing enough with the entrepreneurial side of things, adapting to the modern environment. And every law student has to be their own entrepreneur when they graduate, whether they're networking for a job or setting up their own solo practice.
That's a great statement, Stephen. I would say this. This is the age of brands. And just as companies have to, sort of develop their brands very purposefully through in a multitude of different ways, so too would I say to everyone in your audience, think of yourself as a brand. The brand is an extension of your experience, your personality, your worldview, and cultivate that brand over time. Look for ways to not only don't apologize for what makes you you, and don't check your personality at the door to the law school that you may enroll in. quite the opposite. I would tell you to, absolutely zealously cling to your personality, cling to whatever it was that you were passionate about before you went to law school, and ultimately find ways to integrate whatever other passions you have with what you learn at law school. I think, unfortunately, law school does a lot of harm in terms of trying to, make everyone think that, this is what I have to be a lawyer. And what you have to be a lawyer is, to quote Shakespeare, this above all to be true to yourself. You have to be true to yourself and make your background, your passions, your experience into the lawyer that you're going to be. I think that's really important.
That's incredibly well said. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I love the idea of the authenticity. I think, as you said, law schools are trying to hammer everyone to be a certain way. That's maybe the old model, but today you do have to be your own brand. You do have to put your own message out there. And as you said, that augmented background that people bring to the table, it is based on your own personal experience.
And by the way, one other tip that I would offer your audience, if you don't mind me just chiming in on it, Steve, is, social media is an amazing thing. I started, I sold my company, and 4.5 years ago, I was deciding, well, am I going to, just sort of sit and retire, or am I going to reinvent myself and do something different? I said, well, of course I'm going to do something different, reinvent myself. And one of the things that I did was, take a crash course from some, people in their late teens, early 20s on social media, and developing myself into a brand. And really, using social media both as an educational device as well as a platform for my voice. There are lots of different ways that you can use it in a very, very, I think, purposeful kind of a fashion. And to the issue of, who are the thought leaders out there? Don't just take my word for it, but, you could go online, follow some people, see who they are following and who they are influenced by. And some of the most interesting discussions, frankly, going on in the industry are often conducted over social media. Or in LinkedIn posts. So I would encourage students, even while you're in law school, I know you're very concerned about grades and all that stuff, and that's understandable. But I would invest, and I tell all the law students I speak to around the world about this, I would invest an hour or so a week at least in terms of, reading up on things that are going on, and maybe even participating in social media, because I have people reaching out to me all the time, and I try very hard as best I can, where I think something is, thoughtfully, a question that's thoughtfully posed to me, I always try to answer.
Very cool. Well, it's kind of funny. I was asking earlier about websites like Law 360, but ultimately more of the actual conversation may be happening on these other platforms too, like LinkedIn, like Twitter and such. So I appreciate you raising those extra ways that people can kind of get a handle on what's happening.
Sure.
And before we wrap up, would you mind sharing the best way for folks to get in touch with you, the best way for them to follow you and what you're up to? Because it sounds like you're up to a lot.
Well, I'm keeping myself pretty busy. So the best ways to follow me would be on Twitter, at Legal Mosaic, LEGALMOSAIC. Check out my website. You'll see some of the things that I'm up to. That's www.legalmosaic.com, or on LinkedIn. You could, follow me if you'd like. And I think those would be, the best ways to get in touch.
Great. Well, I'll definitely link to those in the description for this episode. Mark, I appreciate you sharing your advice and insights on the field with everyone. I'm sure it'll be enormously helpful to them.
It's been a lot of fun, Steve. Thanks very much.